Morning all. This is another fine game by another excellent Muswell Hill chess club player, Vedantha Kumar, whose ECF is 177. Vedantha is a very bright guy, by the way, attending Cambridge University. As black here, he played the Tango system, very innovative opening system, knight c6. White can get in very serious trouble on the dark squares if they don't really know what they're doing. I think most IMs or GMs will play knight f3 here to prevent e5 from black, which kind of weakens these dark squares. David Ebbett, ECF 180, he played knight c3 and he really just allowed the tango to happen. This knight tangoing to the queen side. Maybe Vedantha's been watching some of my videos here, because I've had great results with this system, particularly in bullet chess. White is really struggling here. Black has really solved many of his strategic issues, and white now has, clear dark square weaknesses to potentially exploit. But the c5 square is cheekily taken away from black now with this next move, bishop e3. So, how does Vedantha react to this? Well, actually, he played something very clever. Bishop b4, which not only gives the opportunity, immediately of threatening to win a pawn, but also it means that with his next move, after white plays f3, his next move is also is still going to contest the c5 square and the diagonal. Queen e7, very nice move from a positional perspective. Get rid of the dark square bishops, and then these dark squares will be even weaker. Knight ge2, bishop c5. Black has achieved a very nice game already. So Vedantha takes off those dark square bishops, and now queen b4, hitting two pawns at the same time. In fact, white is forced to lose one. Let's have a look at Houdini for this to see the tactics here. White's best apparently, there's a few moves actually. White could castle queenside apparently. So what's happening here? Queen c4, is that too dangerous? Knight g3 might be too dangerous here. Knight b5, it's all getting a bit hairy. So maybe queen b4 wasn't needed. But then again, we're not playing against engines, so queen b4 looks as though it could have been useful. But anyway, the opponent perhaps didn't react in the best way. This retreating knight move, knight c1. So Vedantha snapped up that b2 pawn, and black is better. There isn't too much compensation here apparently. So d6. Maybe this is a slight blunder though. b6 might be preferred according to Houdini, with keeping the advantage. But after d6, white potentially apparently has check, then taking on d6 or bishop f1. Why would this be strong? Rook b3. It's not actually that clear. If white regains the pawn, it's still not bad for black. Knight b6 is still not bad. It's actually better for black still. So that was absolutely fine actually, it seems, on brief analysis, even with an engine, even if bishop b5 a check had been played, which it was. So bishop d7, or rather that continuation had been played. So bishop takes d7, knight takes cd, rook takes b7. So that's exactly almost what happened in the game. Amazing. So knight c5 was played here, which looks pretty strong, as well as knight b6. The engine suggestion knight b6. So they've really both followed an engine path there, both players in this position. So what Houdini would have played, bishop b5 check, and then taking on d6, and then taking on b7. But even so, black in this position, he's got a stable position. The knight's quite nice on c5. This is what you get once you get rid of the dark square bishops. You get these nice squares to play around with, particularly c5. So black has the upper hand now. Let's turn off the engine actually. Rook c8. Now the other knight comes to f4. Wonderful dark square play. Knight cd3, hitting that knight on c3 now. Knight retreats. Rook c2, rook on the 7th. a2 is very vulnerable. Knight takes f4, knight takes f4 to avoid losing a piece forced. So snapping up another pawn. This pawn is more real here, it seems. After takes. White has no chance to regain now with his rook attacked. Can't simply take. So he protects the rook. Now castling, and of course the queen's tied up at the moment. So g3. So Vedantha is a clear pawn up here. Knight d3, but even better, White's king, well from his perspective, is slightly vulnerable now. Rook a1, and now trading off the a7 pawn for a vicious attack is very nice. Rook b8. So queen a7, White takes the bait. But the back row is a bit weak here with these pawns. So maybe Vedantha, I think he was approaching just 5 minutes, he was getting short of time. But his attack rages on now. Check. h6, finally giving his king a pigeonhole. So the rook doesn't necessarily, is not tied down, but it's exchanged off immediately now. Queen a2, and now the queen and knight wonderfully coordinate in this final phase. Check. Knight e1, immediately threatening things like knight f3, queen g2. So f4, check. Queen e2, check. And now wonderful finish, queen h5. So the knight cuts off the king, the g2 escape. Check, mate. Fantastic. This is how one key game when Ealing went down. Ealing, who were one of the league leaders in the Middlesex League. So let's have a look at this game in overview and summary again. And actually Vedantha's own notes, which he emailed to me, he said until move 7 he knew it was all free, but queen e7 seemed a little strange. He thought the normal situation was to take on c3, play d6, play on the king's side. But he was worried about c5, a quick c5 from White. Okay, now let's look again. So the Tango is a wonderful system as a surprise system, especially if White doesn't play knight f3. If Black gets in the e5, then the Tango really gets the knight tangoing from one side of the board to the other, with dark square bonuses to play on, particularly c5 and later, as you saw, f4. These two key squares, like in the French defence in the advantage variation, you get f5 and c4. There's a kind of symmetry here that it's actually c5 and f4. So dark square complexes here. It is weak. So exchanging off, perfectly good, strong, solid positional play. Bit cheeky to nab a pawn, perhaps. Maybe White's best is castling queenside with potentially very good compensation for losing the c4 pawn, but he didn't do that. Instead he went for this seemingly very aggressive continuation of check, then taking on b7. So he got rid of his problem piece, because otherwise the bishop would have been hemmed in by his own white pawns. So White doesn't have major piece issues, but Black still has those nice dark square outposts. And even though there's only one remaining, this is a very important knight on f4. Gaspar's favourite position for an attacking knight. In the Royal Lopez is f5. This is the kind of same thing in reverse. f4 is the key knight square you want if you want a kingside attack. Immediately threatening actually rook g2. So rook f2 parried that. Queen a7. So nabbing a pawn again. And then we saw in this final phase this a7 pawn was used as bait. It decentralised White a bit. And now these dark squares were also fairly decisive, even in this simplified position. Queen and knight, this lovely mating net brought out the mate with queen h5 checkmate. Well done to Vedantha. Muswell Hill is a superb chess club to be in. It's a very exciting time, and the last 4 match victories have been absolutely superb. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.